hello there. Thank you. Your hair also looks nice. This video is me unpacking, postmorteming my recent NaNoWriMo experience. And there's a good chance that is not going to be useful for you. And that's a great way to start a video, to really reel you in. But I think that there is not a lot said about what a first draft is supposed to be that fits my idea of a first draft. And I want this part of my brain to exist out there in the world, because I think there are two main schools of what the first draft is perceived to be, and I want to talk about those. And then I want to talk about how I feel about a first draft. And the first version that I hear is, the first draft is just, you have to write it, and then once you have it out of your system, then you can really start to work on what you're actually going to write. And that kind of is true for me. But the reason I don't like that line of thinking is because then when I'm writing the first draft, I feel like, oh, I don't actually need to worry about any of this. This just needs to be written down. I need to hit the magic 50,000 words so that I can get to the actual writing. And that thinking doesn't help, because then you just write something that you don't care about. And I'm choosing my words carefully here, because I don't think that a first draft has to have purpose. It doesn't have to have, this is my definite endpoint and that's what I'm going to write towards. It can, but it doesn't have to have that. What it does need to have is your heart in it. You need to care about what you're writing. And if you just treat it as, well, I'll write whatever, I just need to get the first draft down, that doesn't help you. That's worse than a free writing exercise. And free writing exercises are useful. I'm not knocking free writing. But if you just say, I'm going to write whatever comes to mind, and I'm going to hope that something good comes out of it, it doesn't give you what you are probably hoping it will. And you're not setting yourself up for success with your future drafts, because then really what you've done is you've let out 50,000 words, however long your first draft is, of ink spilling onto paper. And if that's what you want, if that's what you're trying to make, then that can have its own merit. But I don't think that it is useful if you are trying to craft a novel, because then you're not structuring it out in a way that is going to help you later on. You're not doing yourself any favors. You're just doing busy work because you've been told this has to be a first draft. And then once you get to your second or third draft, you start doing the things that I'm going to be talking about in about 5 minutes or so. I have done this before. There are not quite to the extent that I've just been talking about, but I have certainly just written for the sake of writing to meet that 50,000 word goal. I didn't do that this time. If anything, I ran out of word count before I ran out of plot. And we'll talk about that later. But I've done this before where I just said, okay, I need to get a first draft down, so I'm just going to keep spewing out whatever comes to mind. That has its merits, but again, I don't think that's a first draft. I think that's free writing. And those are two different things, both of which have their merits, both of which have their place. I think that knowing that is helpful. Free writing can unlock some ideas, but calling that a first draft is, like I said, making more work for yourself in the future. The other thing that I sometimes see talked about, and as someone who is currently writing a video game, what I often have seen, and I've seen this from two writers that I respect tremendously, and I'm glad that this works for them. I'm not saying you shouldn't do either of these things. I'm saying that these things don't work for me. And I'm trying to give a third option in all this. And I'm building all this up, not intentionally. This video is a first draft because I don't have time to do more. And so I'm trying to structure it in the way that I'm going to be talking about later. What I sometimes see is writers will say, well, I've done all my research on my characters and my setting, and I really understand them thoroughly, and I have my whole plot structured out, so by the time I get to actually writing it, I don't go back and do rewrites. I just write it down first time, and it's very hard for me to go back and reanalyze my writing, because if I do, it feels overwritten or some other reason. Maybe just don't like rewriting because you don't like rereading your own work. That's great. That works for some people. Some people can get it down first time and it is wonderful prose. I can't. I just can't. I don't have that skill set. I wish I did. It would save me some time, but it doesn't work for me. I think it also shows in less experienced and less talented writers that they think that they have that skill and they will try and do that and be like, why doesn't it work for me? Why can't I just write it down the first time and have it be good? Why aren't people liking it? And I think that it is something that works great for some people who have constructed the entire world either through separate documents or within their own minds. And they already know, okay, this plot point and this plot point need to match up. And this one over here, I can pull that in, tie that up into a nice bow, and we'll get a nice scene out of that. There are writers who can do that. I can sometimes do that, but certainly not for something the length of a novel. My brain's not that talented, and I don't want to devote the time, effort, energy to learning how to do that with my brain, because there are more worthwhile things I can do with my brain. Like I said, some people just using the quote-unquote first draft as, well, I've already planned everything out, so now I just need to write it out. I cannot do that. What I have found is that I can usually figure out the first 10,000 words worth of where I'm going to take a first draft. And I figured that out because I have been thinking over what to do with the first draft I just wrote, which is the sequel to the novel I published about a year ago. And I got through right around the first 10,000 words and I just got stuck. And I was like, where do I go now? What happens next? And then I had to spend the next few hours just struggling to get started with what comes after that. And what I realized is that I was trying to do that second thing. I was trying to have the story already set, and I just had to write. And then I would have not my finished novel, but something very close to it. Because it's a sequel, and you can just go ahead and write your way through that, and you already have most of the characters and the world in mind, so you don't need to develop all that. You just have it in hand. And what I've learned is that, sequel or no, for me, the first draft is that first rehearsal. This is for all the theater kids out there and theater adults, I guess. It's that first rehearsal where you are up on your feet and just starting the blocking. And you have this general idea of the structure of the play, and you're told the set's gonna look like this eventually, marked out in tape on the floor. And we have some chairs set up to resemble whatever the set's going to be. And it's not good. It is not pleasant to read yet. I think that it is hopefully better to read in its current state than it would be to watch one of those rehearsals. But it is nowhere near a product that you want an audience to see. And it's not meant to be. A first draft is, for me, a chance for the story to work itself out and figure out its highs and lows and find things that will work and 10 things that won't for each one that will. And it can be, we actually can't have this set piece over here. This is just, it's not going to work. We thought we were going to have time for this costume change, but we're not. We're going to have to figure something else out. Or, we really need a costume change there. If we don't, then the whole thing falls apart. I guess the difference is that usually, not with every play I was ever in, but usually the script at that point is pretty well set. And occasionally I will go into a story and I'll know this is the ending. And when an ending is kind enough to present itself to me, I love to write towards it. I don't know what the ending of the story is, even after finishing my first draft. I know a big moment close to the end. I know how one set of characters' arcs wrap up. I think that an entire chunk of another set of characters' plotline is maybe for a future book, but I don't think fits in this one. And so that still goes in. You still write out everything that you can from that plot line and figure out what is true in this, what is useful in this, what pulls at my heartstrings in this, what is hot in this, what makes me interested to keep knowing and spending time with these characters. And the skill of learning what works and what doesn't in a first draft is one that I am just starting to really get a handle on. It is not an easy skill. It is a matter of taste. It is a matter of recognizing something in its rawest form and determining whether, when it reaches a higher state of polish, if it will have what interests me about it in its current state, if it will have more, if it will lose something in the broader context of the thing. The first draft is about learning how the whole thing fits together. The first draft is for deciding what your novel might be. The first draft is not for nailing things down, for me. If I try and do that, then the apple cart is going to get upset 2 or 3 drafts later, and I'm making more work for myself. I previously, in my first part of this story, The Hardfang Chronicles, Book 1, The Outcast and the Chosen One, available now. Go to joshkloss.com/transmermaidpirate. Get yours today. You can get yourself into traps. You can say, well, of course, the Hurtvane twins are at an academy, and that academy is going to be where they have a lot of formative experiences, and the time that they spend at that academy is going to be really important. And what I eventually did is I said, no, they're not at an academy. They're one of them works in a library, one of them's a farm girl, and that is what informs who they are to an extent that is useful in building up this plot. And it also helps develop the character of their parents and of the community around them. And the academy itself, which didn't make it past like the 5th-ish draft, it didn't interest me. And that's a big thing in a first draft is I can't do this yet, but in about a month, maybe a little less, but probably in about a month, start of the next year, I will go back through it and see what I wrote that actually interests me. I can think through right now. One of the new characters really interests me. I think that I need to rework 40% of her character, because what I eventually got to was that her objective in the story didn't really make sense, but her role in the story and what she means to other characters in the story does. And so I need to refine her objective and direct her elsewhere to do something else. And there are going to need to be new characters. Characters are going to have to be replaced or merged. That's all an issue for future me. And I know that future me can do those things because I did the work of laying down that very basic blocking and figuring out what does and doesn't work. There's a huge thing in there that I know doesn't work, but I had to write it all the way out to understand that. And those ideas, whenever I get on an idea that doesn't work, it's usually because there is something further along that track that I think will. And that happened, right? The last things that I wrote in that character's arc were paying off that idea I had that I didn't really know how to verbalize until I had it down that far. I'm speaking in abstraction because I'm very guarded of my work when talking about it in front of potentially the entire internet. And so I hope you'll allow for that. But the concept of you need to get from point A to some point, and you know that point is there, but you don't know what it is, so you just set off in its direction. That's what a first draft can do. That's what I think my first drafts are best at, because the first draft, you can know where you're going, or it can be a mystery. As I've indicated before, more often than not for me, it is a little bit of a mystery. I'm very lucky when it's not, is what I'll say, because usually I don't get ideas that are fully formed. I think the only one that I mostly knew would be the first 4-ish acts of The Guild Mistress, which is a webcomic I made that has since ended. And then after that, I didn't know, because one of the characters showed up and said, I play a bigger role in this now, and the story changes, because this character, as I started writing her, Tara, wasn't a side character, wasn't an antagonist, was in fact essentially protagonist, deuterotagonist perhaps, but right there up there. And for me, a webcomic is generally going to be a first draft on the fly, but I knew how to get to a certain point with it, and then I was going to let myself be free. That works with a webcomic, hopefully. Oh, hopefully. But I don't think it does for a novel. I think that for a novel, if you just say on one extreme, well, just I'm going to write whatever, and I don't care what I write, I think that you're wasting your time with a first draft. If you say I'm only going to write a first draft after I have everything hammered down, again, for some percentage of people, that is a great strategy. And I'm not trying to say those people don't exist or that they're doing it wrong. If you can do that, that is great, and I love that for you. There are so many other people who will not write a first draft because they feel like they don't know how to get from point A to point B, and more specifically, they don't have any idea what point B is. Using your first draft as a way to figure out what point B is with that intention, that's what I think it should be used for. And this video, which I said is a first draft, was me kind of figuring that out. And if it was helpful, that's great. Thanks for watching. I don't think this video is going to catch as many views as my Oblivion memes, but that's okay. I don't mind that. It'd be great if it did. Oh, 2,000 views? Are you kidding me? That's the dream. But that's all. That's me decompressing from NaNoWriMo. That's me hopefully helping either with if you're watching to this point, I figure either you're trying to figure out your writing process, you like me, thank you, or you just needed some background noise, thank you. But this is a topic that I don't think is talked about much. I think that the first draft, specifically as I see it, is usually not represented well. It is either romanticized as a mysterious quest to go out and find something, or it is you have your plan in place and you just need to write it down. And I am advocating for a middle ground between those two, and asking you to write with purpose, but not with fear. Because I don't think fear is a good motivator. And I think that if you have that first idea and you really like it, then finding that second idea can be very difficult unless you set out to make your first draft about that. And I'm using the term first draft. It doesn't have to be first draft. It can be vision casting. It can be a mood board. It can be just writing out a scene. But doing something to actually build out that universe, for me, a first draft is the best way to do that. I'll be lucky if 5% of this first draft makes it to the final version as written. But it's still a necessary component, and its quality is not the important part. It is the fact that I now know my story better than I knew before. I think that I'm rambling at this point, so I'm going to wrap up now. And thank you again for watching. And I hope you have a lovely time zone whenever and wherever you're watching this. Bye!